Don't you dare look at me like that. Ethan's voice came out quieter than he intended, almost a whisper, and he hated how it trembled at the edges. He stood in the doorway of the barn, dust particles catching the late afternoon sunlight that streamed through the wooden slats behind him. His heart was hammering so hard he was certain Garrett could hear it from where he stood, barely 3 feet away, hay-dusted and sun-worn and looking at him with those impossible eyes that made Ethan forget how to breathe properly. Garrett didn't move. He just tilted his head slightly, that infuriatingly gentle smile playing at the corner of his mouth, the one that made Ethan's stomach flip and his resolve crumble like paper in a fire. Like what? Garrett asked, his voice low and rough from the day's work, and God, why did he have to sound like that? Why did everything about him have to be so perfectly, devastatingly real? Ethan took a step back, felt his shoulders hit the doorframe. You know exactly what I mean, he said, trying to sound firm, trying to sound like he meant it. But his hands were shaking and he shoved them into his jacket pockets before Garrett could notice. Before Garrett could see just how much that look affected him, how much he affected him. How 3 months on this ranch had unraveled every careful defense Ethan had spent 24 years building. The thing was, Ethan had come to Montana to escape. To run from a life in Chicago that had become suffocating, the corporate job that drained his soul, the expectations from his family that felt like chains, the endless parade of first dates that went nowhere because he always felt like he was pretending to be someone else. His cousin had offered him a summer working on his ranch, and Ethan had said yes without thinking, packed a single suitcase, and driven 16 hours straight until the city disappeared behind him and all that remained was sky and mountains and silence. He hadn't expected Garrett Holloway. The first time Ethan saw Garrett, he was wrestling a spooked horse back into its stall, speaking in low, soothing tones that somehow cut through the animal's panic. Ethan had just arrived at the ranch, still wearing his city clothes, dark jeans, and a button-down that suddenly felt ridiculous in the dust and heat. He'd watched from a distance as Garrett calmed the horse with nothing but his voice and his steady presence, strong hands gentle on the animal's neck. When Garrett finally turned and saw Ethan standing there, he'd smiled, not the polite, distant smile people gave strangers, but something warmer, more open. You must be the cousin, Garrett had said, walking over with an easy confidence that came from knowing exactly who he was and where he belonged. I'm Garrett. Your cousin hired me last year. I handle most of the horse training. Ethan had shaken his hand, rough, calloused, warm, and felt something shift in his chest that he immediately told himself to ignore. Ethan, he'd managed. Thanks for, I don't know, not letting that horse destroy the place before I even started. Garrett had laughed, a sound that was somehow both rough and gentle, and Ethan had thought, this is going to be a problem. He'd been right. Because Garrett wasn't just attractive, though he absolutely was, with his sun-weathered skin, dark hair that always looked slightly too long, and eyes the color of honey in sunlight. No, what made Garrett dangerous was everything else. The way he moved through the world with quiet confidence. The way he could spend an entire day working until his shirt was soaked through with sweat and still have energy to help fix the fence line at sunset. The way he listened when people spoke, really listened, like their words mattered more than anything else in that moment. The way he looked at Ethan sometimes, like he could see straight through to all the parts Ethan tried to keep hidden. They'd become friends quickly, too quickly maybe, working side by side every day made it inevitable. Long hours repairing fences, training horses, hauling feed, fixing whatever broke on a property that seemed determined to fall apart. The work was hard, physical, exhausting in a way that Ethan's desk job had never been, but it was also honest, real, and Garrett made it bearable. More than bearable. Garrett told terrible jokes while they worked, the kind that made Ethan groan and laugh at the same time. He taught Ethan how to properly saddle a horse, how to read the sky for incoming weather, how to fix a fence post so it would actually stay fixed. He shared his lunch when Ethan forgot to pack enough. He never made Ethan feel stupid for not knowing ranch things, never made him feel like he didn't belong. And slowly, without meaning to, Ethan started looking forward to seeing Garrett every morning. Started noticing things he shouldn't notice. The way Garrett's hands looked when he gripped the reins, the rare, full smile that transformed his entire face, the concentration in his eyes when he worked on something difficult. Started finding excuses to stand closer, to let their shoulders brush when they walked, to extend conversations long after the work was done. Started lying awake in the small cabin his cousin had given him, staring at the ceiling and wondering what it would feel like to reach across the space that always seemed to exist between them and just touch, really touch. But Ethan was good at lying to himself. He'd had plenty of practice. So he told himself it was just friendship, just appreciation for someone who'd made his exile bearable. He told himself the flutter in his stomach when Garrett laughed was nothing. He told himself the dreams that woke him up gasping in the middle of the night meant nothing. He told himself that the way his heart stopped every time Garrett looked at him a certain way, soft and searching, and something else he was afraid to name, was completely normal and definitely not a problem. He almost believed it. The night everything changed started innocently enough. They'd been working on the north pasture all day, replacing an entire section of fence that had been damaged in a storm. It was grueling work, hot and endless, and by the time the sun started setting, they were both exhausted, dirt-covered, and ready to be done. "Beer?" Garrett had asked, wiping sweat from his forehead and leaving a streak of dust in its wake. "Your cousin keeps some in the barn fridge, figure we earned it." So they'd ended up sitting on hay bales in the barn as twilight painted the sky purple and gold through the open doors. The beer was cold and perfect, and for a while they just sat in comfortable silence, listening to the horses shift in their stalls and watching the day fade into night. "Can I ask you something?" Garrett said finally, his voice careful in a way that made Ethan's guard go up immediately. "Sure," Ethan said, even though every instinct told him this was dangerous territory. Garrett was quiet for a moment, picking at the label on his beer bottle. When he spoke, he didn't look at Ethan. "Why'd you really come out here? Your cousin mentioned something about needing a break from the city, but I don't know, feels like there's more to it." Ethan's first instinct was to deflect, to give the easy answer about needing a change of pace, about wanting to try something different. But there was something about the way Garrett asked, genuine, patient, like he actually wanted to know, that made the truth slip out before Ethan could stop it. "I was drowning," Ethan said quietly. "In Chicago, in my life, I had this job that paid well but made me miserable. A family that loved me but didn't really see me, you know. They had this whole vision of who I was supposed to be and I couldn't fit into it anymore. I couldn't pretend it was enough." He paused, surprised at how much he'd said, how raw it sounded in the quiet barn. Garrett was watching him now, really watching, and Ethan couldn't read the expression on his face. "So you ran," Garrett said, not a judgment, just a statement. "Yeah," Ethan admitted, "I ran." Garrett nodded slowly, took a long drink of his beer. "I get that," he said. "Sometimes running is the bravest thing you can do." And then he looked at Ethan, really looked at him, with an intensity that made the air feel thinner and Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Because there was something in Garrett's eyes, something soft and knowing and impossibly tender, that made Ethan's carefully constructed walls start to crack. "What?" Ethan asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Garrett's smile was small, almost sad. "Nothing, just, I'm glad you ended up here." After that night, something changed. Or maybe nothing changed, and that was the problem. Because suddenly Ethan was hyper-aware of every moment they spent together, every casual touch that lingered a second too long. Every time their eyes met and held just past the point of comfortable. He started pulling back, creating distance where there hadn't been any before. He volunteered for solo tasks, found excuses to work on different parts of the ranch, kept conversations short and surface level. It felt like self-preservation. Because the alternative, acknowledging what he was starting to feel, what had maybe been building since that first handshake 3 months ago, was terrifying. Garrett noticed. Of course he noticed. He'd grown quieter, more cautious around Ethan, like he was trying to figure out what he'd done wrong, and that made everything worse because Garrett hadn't done anything wrong. The problem was entirely Ethan's. The problem was that Ethan was falling for his best friend. The problem was that every time Garrett smiled at him, Ethan wanted to close the distance between them and find out what his lips tasted like. Every time they worked side by side, Ethan had to fight the urge to reach out and touch Garrett's hand, his arm, his face. Every night, Ethan lay in bed thinking about what it would feel like to fall asleep next to someone who made him feel this alive, this real. And the worst part, the absolutely terrifying part, was that sometimes, in those unguarded moments when Garrett thought Ethan wasn't looking, Ethan caught something in his expression that looked an awful lot like longing. But that was impossible, wasn't it? It all came to a head on a Friday night. The ranch hosted a small barbecue for some of the seasonal workers who'd helped with the summer haying. Nothing fancy, just burgers and beer and a fire pit under the stars. Ethan had considered skipping it, but his cousin had practically dragged him out of his cabin, insisting he needed to socialize with someone other than horses. Garrett was there, of course. He was always there. And he was laughing with one of the seasonal workers, a guy named Chris who was probably Ethan's age, attractive in that rugged, outdoorsy way, and clearly interested in Garrett based on the way he kept finding excuses to touch his arm, lean in close when he talked. Ethan told himself the hot, bitter feeling spreading through his chest wasn't jealousy. He told himself he didn't care. He grabbed another beer and moved to the opposite side of the fire, determined to ignore the way Chris made Garrett laugh, the way Garrett's smile seemed brighter than it had been in weeks. But then Chris leaned in and whispered something in Garrett's ear, his hand resting on Garrett's shoulder, and Garrett actually blushed, full on, visible even in the firelight, blushed, and something in Ethan snapped. He set down his beer and walked away from the fire, away from the laughter and the light, toward the barn where he could breathe, where he could think, where he could shove all these impossible feelings back into the box where they belonged. He made it about halfway there before he heard footsteps behind him. "Ethan, wait." Garrett's voice, of course. Ethan stopped but didn't turn around. "I'm fine, just needed some air." "Bullshit." Garrett's voice was closer now, just a few feet behind him. "You've been avoiding me for 2 weeks, and now you can't even stand to be at the same fire, so either tell me what I did wrong or—" "You didn't do anything wrong!" The words came out sharper than Ethan intended. He finally turned around, found Garrett standing there in the moonlight, looking confused and hurt and so impossibly beautiful it made Ethan's chest ache. "That's the problem, you didn't do anything wrong." Garrett frowned. "Then what?" "Just go back to Chris," Ethan said, hatting how bitter he sounded, hatting that he couldn't control this anymore. "He's clearly interested, you should pursue that." Understanding dawned in Garrett's eyes, followed by something that looked almost like hope, and that was somehow worse than anything else. "Are you, Ethan, are you jealous?" No, the lie was automatic, defensive. "Why would I be jealous? You can talk to whoever you want." "That's not what I asked." Ethan's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "What do you want me to say, Garrett?" "The truth." Garrett took a step closer and Ethan's heart rate kicked into overdrive. "For once, just tell me the truth." And there it was, the moment Ethan had been running from for 3 months. The question he didn't know how to answer without breaking everything. His breath came faster, shallow, and he could feel panic rising in his chest because this was it, the edge of the cliff, and he didn't know how to step back. "I can't," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can't do this." He turned to walk away, but Garrett caught his arm, gentle but firm, and the contact sent electricity racing through Ethan's entire body. "Don't run," Garrett said quietly. "Not from this, not from me." Ethan stood frozen, Garrett's hand still on his arm, warm and solid and real. Everything in him screamed to pull away, to protect himself, to keep pretending. But he was so tired. Tired of lying, tired of running, tired of pretending he didn't feel what he felt. "You want the truth?" Ethan turned back to face him and his voice came out raw, desperate. "Fine. The truth is I came out here to escape my life and instead I found something that scares me more than anything I left behind. The truth is I can't stop thinking about you. I can't work next to you without wanting to." He cut himself off, shook his head. "The truth is every time you look at me a certain way I forget how to breathe, and I hate it. I hate that I feel this way because you're my friend and I don't want to lose that, but I also can't keep pretending anymore." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and irreversible. Ethan waited for Garrett to let go, to step back, to make some excuse and walk away, waited for the friendship to shatter like glass. But Garrett didn't move. His hand was still on Ethan's arm and his eyes, God, his eyes were so soft, so full of something that looked like relief. "You think you're the only one?" Garrett said quietly. "Ethan, I've been trying to figure out how to tell you for months. Every day I work next to you and I have to stop myself from doing something that would scare you off. Every time you smile at me I want to memorize it. Every time you pulled away these last couple weeks it felt like losing something I never actually had." Ethan's mind was reeling. "What are you saying?" Garrett took a step closer, close enough now that Ethan could feel the warmth radiating from him. "I'm saying Chris was nice, but I spent that entire conversation wishing he was you. I'm saying when you walked away I couldn't stay there because being anywhere you aren't feels wrong now." He paused, his voice dropping even lower. "I'm saying I'm terrified too, but not of this, of losing my chance to tell you how I feel." Ethan's breath caught. "And how do you feel?" Garrett's free hand came up, hesitated for just a moment, then gently touched Ethan's face, fingers light against his jaw, thumb brushing his cheekbone. The touch was careful, reverent, asking permission with every movement. "Like I've been waiting my whole life for someone to see me the way you do. Like I don't want to spend another day pretending this isn't real." They stood like that for what felt like an eternity, Garrett's hand on Ethan's face, the space between them measured in heartbeats and held breath. The night air was cool, but Ethan felt like he was burning from the inside out. He could hear the distant sounds of laughter from the barbecue, could see the glow of the fire through the trees, but all of it felt like it belonged to a different world. A world that didn't include this moment, this truth, this terrifying and perfect thing happening between them. "I don't know how to do this," Ethan whispered. His hand came up almost involuntarily, covering Garrett's where it still rested against his face. I've dated people, but I've never felt like this. like if I get this wrong, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Garrett's smile was small and understanding. Then we figure it out together, we don't have to rush, we don't have to have all the answers right now. What if we mess this up? What if we try and it ruins everything? What if we don't try and we spend the rest of our lives wondering what could have been? Garrett's thumb traced a gentle line along Ethan's jaw and Ethan shivered. That seems worse to me, missing this because we were too afraid to reach for it. Ethan closed his eyes, leaning into the touch, letting himself feel it fully for the first time. Garrett's hand was warm, slightly rough from work, and the tenderness in the gesture made Ethan's throat tight. When he opened his eyes again, Garrett was watching him with an expression so open, so vulnerable that Ethan felt something in his chest crack wide open. I'm still scared, Ethan admitted. Me too, Garrett said, then quieter, can I kiss you? The question hung between them, simple and enormous. Ethan's heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat, in his fingertips, in every nerve ending that suddenly felt alive and electric. He thought about all the reasons to say no, the fear, the uncertainty, the very real possibility that this could change everything in ways he couldn't predict. But then he thought about Garrett's smile, about the way he'd felt these past 3 months, more alive, more himself than he'd been in years. He thought about what Garrett had said about running, about missing chances, about spending a life wondering. Yeah, Ethan breathed, please. Garrett leaned in slowly, giving Ethan every opportunity to change his mind, to pull away. But Ethan didn't want to pull away, not anymore, not from this. He tilted his face up, closing the final inches between them, and when their lips met, it felt like something inside him finally clicked into place. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, exploratory, like they were learning a new language together. Garrett's lips were soft and warm, and he kissed like he did everything else, with focus, with care, like Ethan was something precious that deserved attention. Ethan's free hand found Garrett's shirt, fingers curling into the fabric, anchoring himself against the dizzying rush of sensation. When they finally pulled apart, they stayed close, foreheads touching, breathing the same air. Ethan could feel Garrett smiling against his lips. Okay, Garrett asked softly. Ethan laughed, the sound shaky but genuine. Yeah, more than okay. They didn't go back to the barbecue. Instead, they walked through the pastures under the vast Montana sky, staying close enough that their shoulders brushed with every step, occasionally reaching for each other's hand like they were testing the reality of this new thing between them. The moon was bright enough to see by, and the night was full of cricket song and the distant sounds of cattle settling in for the night. How long, Ethan asked eventually, how long have you known? Garrett was quiet for a moment, considering. Known, maybe 2 months, but I think I was falling before I realized what was happening. There was this day, you remember when that storm came through in June, we were in the barn waiting it out and you were talking about some book you'd read, getting all passionate about the story, your whole face lit up. And I looked at you and thought, oh, this is going to change everything. Ethan remembered that day, remembered feeling self-conscious about rambling, about taking up space with his words. He'd had no idea Garrett had been looking at him like that. Why didn't you say anything? Same reason you didn't, I'd guess, fear, not wanting to assume, not wanting to lose what we had. Garrett squeezed his hand. Plus, I wasn't sure if, you never really talked about your dating life, your preferences. I didn't want to make you uncomfortable if I was reading everything wrong. Ethan huffed a quiet laugh. I was so deep in denial I barely knew my own preferences, or I knew, I guess, but I was really good at not thinking about it too hard. It felt easier to just not engage, to keep things simple and surface level. He paused. You're the first person who's ever made me want to stop running from myself. They reached the fence line of the north pasture and stopped, leaning against the rails. The mountains were dark silhouettes against the star-filled sky, and the air smelled like grass and sage and summer. Garrett turned to face Ethan, still holding his hand. So what happens now? Garrett asked. It was the question Ethan had been avoiding thinking about, because the summer was almost over, 2 more weeks, and then his cousin wouldn't need the extra help anymore. Ethan's apartment lease in Chicago was still active, his belongings still in storage. His real life was waiting for him, 1,500 miles away. I don't know, Ethan said honestly. I haven't figured that part out yet. Do you want to go back to Chicago? Ethan thought about his old life, the tiny apartment, the job that drained him, the sense of going through motions without meaning. Then he thought about the past 3 months, the sunrises over the ranch, the honest exhaustion of physical work, the way he'd started to feel like himself again, the way he felt when Garrett looked at him. No, he said finally, I really don't. Garrett's smile was visible even in the moonlight. Then don't. It's not that simple. I have responsibilities, a lease, belongings. I know, I'm not saying it's easy, I'm just saying, There are options. Your cousin mentioned wanting to expand the operation, maybe hire someone permanent to help with the horses, and I know the neighboring ranch is looking for help too. Garrett's thumb traced circles on the back of Ethan's hand. I'm not trying to pressure you, I just want you to know you don't have to go back to something that made you miserable, not if you don't want to. The next 2 weeks felt like existing in two different worlds simultaneously. There was the world where Ethan and Garrett were, something new, something fragile and precious, where they stole moments together, early morning coffee before anyone else was awake, late evening walks after the work was done, conversations that stretched into the night and left them both exhausted and happy the next day. Where Garrett would touch the small of Ethan's back as they passed in the barn, and Ethan would find excuses to stand close enough to feel Garrett's warmth. But there was also the world of decisions and logistics. Ethan called his landlord in Chicago, negotiated another month on his lease while he figured things out. He had long phone calls with his parents that always ended with them asking when he was coming home, and Ethan not having a good answer. He updated his resume, searched for job postings in nearby towns, tried to figure out what a life in Montana would actually look like beyond the bubble of summer romance. And then there was his cousin, who'd been watching them with knowing eyes for weeks. "You planning to stick around?" Tom asked one afternoon while they were fixing a broken water line. He said it casually like it didn't matter, but his tone suggested otherwise. Ethan looked up from the pipe he was working on. "Would you want me to?" Tom shrugged. "Garrett seems happier than I've seen him in a long time, and you seem like you actually want to be here, which is more than I can say for most of the help I hire." He paused. "Plus, you're not terrible at this, you could be good at it with more practice." "That's high praise coming from you," Ethan said dryly. "I'm serious, you want a permanent position, I'll make it work. Pay won't be Chicago money, but it's honest work, and you'd have a place to stay." Tom gave him a meaningful look. "Both of you would." The implication wasn't subtle, and Ethan felt his face heat. "We're not, I mean, we're taking it slow, it's new." "I've got eyes, Ethan, and I'm not blind." Tom's expression softened. "Look, I don't care about any of that. What I care about is that you're both good people doing good work and you make each other better. Rest is your business." It should have been reassuring. Instead, it made everything feel more real, more permanent, more serious in a way that sent Ethan's anxiety spiraling. Because accepting Tom's offer meant making a choice. It meant committing to this life, this place, this thing with Garrett that was still so new and uncertain. It meant giving up the safety net of his old life, the option to retreat if things went wrong. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thoughts churning. Around midnight, he gave up and went outside, sat on the porch steps of his cabin in just his sweatpants and t-shirt looking at the stars. He'd been there maybe 10 minutes when he heard footsteps on the gravel path. "Couldn't sleep either?" Garrett's voice came from the darkness, and then he was there, settling onto the step beside Ethan, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Too much thinking," Ethan admitted. "Want to share?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "I'm scared," he finally said, "of making the wrong choice, of staying and having it not work out, of going back and spending the rest of my life regretting it, of letting you down, of letting myself down." Garrett didn't respond immediately. He just sat there, solid and warm beside Ethan, looking up at the same stars. When he spoke, his voice was gentle. "You know what I think? I think you're so busy trying to predict every possible outcome that you're forgetting to pay attention to what you actually want. Not what you think you should want or what would be practical. Or what would make everyone else happy. What do you want, Ethan?" It should have been a simple question, but Ethan had spent so much of his life trying to be what other people needed, trying to fit into spaces that weren't shaped for him, that he'd lost track of his own desires somewhere along the way. "I want to stay," he whispered, and saying it out loud felt like admitting to something dangerous and true. "I want to wake up here every morning. I want to learn how to be good at this life. I want." He turned to look at Garrett, found him already watching with those patient, understanding eyes. "I want to see where this goes with you, with us." Garrett's smile was soft and full of relief. "Then stay." "It's not that simple." "Maybe it is." Garrett shifted closer and his hand found Ethan's in the darkness. "Maybe we make it more complicated than it needs to be because we're afraid of wanting things that feel too good to be real. But Ethan, this is real. You're real, I'm real, what we feel is real. And yeah, it's scary, but isn't it scarier to walk away from something that makes you this happy?" The call from his mother came 3 days before Ethan's lease was up. He was in the barn grooming one of the horses when his phone buzzed and he almost didn't answer. But it was the third time she'd called that week, so he wiped his hands on his jeans and picked up. "Hi, Mom." "Ethan, thank God, I was starting to worry you'd forgotten you have a family." Her tone was light, teasing, but there was an edge underneath. So, I wanted to talk about your return. Your father and I were thinking we could help you move back, maybe drive out and. Mom, I'm not sure I'm coming back. Silence on the other end. Then, what do you mean you're not sure? Your apartment, your job prospects, everything is here. What would you even do out there? Work on the ranch. Tom offered me a permanent position. A permanent position doing what? Manual labor. Ethan, you have a degree, you have. A degree that got me a job I hated, Ethan interrupted, more sharply than he intended. Mom, I was miserable in Chicago. You knew I was miserable. I just didn't know there was another option until I came out here. So this is about running away again, hiding from your problems. No, Ethan took a breath, steadied himself. This is about running toward something, toward a life that actually feels like mine, toward work that matters to me, toward. He paused, unsure how much to say. Toward what? His mother's voice was softer now, confused. Toward someone who makes me want to stop running, Ethan said quietly. Another long silence, then, Ethan, is there someone there? Yeah, he admitted, there is. And this person there, important to you? Very. He heard his mother take a breath, let it out slowly. Is this why you never seemed interested in the people we tried to set you up with? Why you always seemed like you were going through the motions? Ethan closed his eyes. Maybe, probably, I don't know, Mom. I didn't let myself think about it too hard. But yeah, I think I've been running from this part of myself for a long time, and I'm tired of running. Okay, his mother said finally. Okay, I need time to process this, Ethan, but I want you to be happy, you know that, right? Whatever that looks like. It wasn't perfect acceptance, but it was something, a start. I know, Mom, thank you. After they hung up, Ethan stood in the barn for a long time, phone in hand, feeling like he'd just stepped over some invisible line. Garrett found him there 20 minutes later, still standing in the same spot. You okay? Garrett asked, concern clear in his voice. Ethan turned to him and something in his expression must have changed because Garrett's eyes widened slightly. I told my mom, Ethan said, about staying, about you, sort of. And she didn't throw a fit. She said she needs time, but she wants me to be happy. Ethan crossed the distance between them, stopping just inches away. So I'm staying, I'm accepting Tom's offer, I'm canceling my lease and having my stuff shipped out here, I'm doing this. Garrett's smile was brilliant, full of relief and joy and something that looked a lot like love. Yeah. Yeah, Ethan reached up, cupped Garrett's face in his hands the way Garrett had done to him that first night. I'm choosing this, I'm choosing you, I'm choosing us. And then he kissed him, right there in the middle of the barn with dust motes dancing in the afternoon sunlight, and it felt like the first real choice he'd made in years. Fall came to Montana with a fierce beauty, golden aspens against evergreen forests, crisp mornings that made their breath visible, the satisfying exhaustion of preparing the ranch for winter. Ethan's belongings arrived in mid-September, and he spent a weekend unpacking boxes in the small house Tom had agreed to let him and Garrett share on the far edge of the property. It was strange, mixing his city life with this new existence, books and art prints alongside work boots and ranch tools, his nice clothes hanging next to Garrett's worn flannel shirts. But it felt right, more right than anything had in a long time. They settled into a rhythm, worked during the day, sometimes together, sometimes on different parts of the ranch. Evenings cooking dinner in their small kitchen, Garrett teaching Ethan family recipes while Ethan introduced him to dishes he'd learned from his grandmother. Nights curled up on their second-hand couch, sometimes talking, sometimes just existing in comfortable silence while they read or planned the next day's work. There were challenges. Ethan had to learn new skills, had to push through moments of doubt when he felt incompetent or overwhelmed. There were days when the physical work left him so exhausted he could barely move, days when he questioned whether he'd made the right choice leaving his old life behind, days when his parents called and he could hear the confusion in their voices, the unasked questions about what he was really doing out here, who he was really becoming. But there were also mornings when he woke up to Garrett's arm around his waist and thought, yes, this is what I was missing. There were moments of accomplishment, the first horse he helped train, the fence line he repaired without assistance, the morning he watched the sun rise over the mountains and realized he wasn't counting down the days until he could leave. There were nights when Garrett looked at him across the dinner table and Ethan could see his entire future reflected back, not perfect, not always easy, but theirs. And there were the quiet moments of intimacy that took his breath away. Garrett's hand finding his under the table during dinner with Tom and some of the ranch hands. The way Garrett kissed his forehead when Ethan was half asleep. The conversations they had late at night about dreams and fears and all the messy, complicated parts of building a life together. The morning Garrett woke him up with coffee and said, "Good morning, partner," and meant it in every possible way. Their first real fight happened in November during the first serious snowstorm of the season. They'd been working in separate parts of the ranch all day, and by the time they made it home, they were both exhausted, cold, and short-tempered. The fight started over something stupid. Ethan had forgot to close a gate properly, and one of the horses had gotten loose. Garrett had found it and brought it back, but he was frustrated, and Ethan was defensive. "I said I was sorry," Ethan snapped, shrugging out of his snow-covered coat. "I made a mistake, it happens." "It's not about the mistake," Garrett said, his voice tight. "It's about paying attention. You have to be focused out here, Ethan. This isn't your office job where you can zone out and nothing matters. Animals depend on us. The ranch depends on us." "You think I don't know that?" Ethan's own frustration was rising now. "You think I'm not trying? I left my entire life behind for this, Garrett. I'm doing the best I can." "I know you are, but trying isn't enough when. When what? When I'm not as naturally good at this as you, when I didn't grow up on a ranch like you did. Sorry, I can't be perfect." Garrett's expression shifted, hurt flashing across his face. "That's not what I'm saying." "Then what are you saying?" They stared at each other, both breathing hard, the space between them feeling suddenly vast. And then Garrett's shoulders sagged and he ran a hand through his snow-dampened hair. "I'm saying I'm scared," he admitted quietly. "I'm scared you're going to realize this isn't what you wanted, that you're going to resent this life, resent me for encouraging you to stay, and every time something goes wrong, I panic that it's going to be the thing that makes you decide to leave." The anger drained out of Ethan all at once, replaced by understanding. He crossed the room, stopped just in front of Garrett. "I'm not leaving," he said firmly. "One mistake with a gate doesn't mean I'm giving up on this, on us. Is that what you're really worried about?" Garrett nodded, not meeting his eyes. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for you to wake up and realize you made a huge mistake." Ethan took Garrett's face in his hands, made him look up. "The only mistake would be not fighting for this. Yeah, I screwed up today, I'll screw up again, but that doesn't mean I don't want to be here, it doesn't mean I don't want you." He leaned his forehead against Garrett's. "You have to trust that I'm in this, really in this." "I'm trying," Garrett whispered. "I know we're both trying, that's all we can do." They stood like that for a long moment, and then Garrett pulled Ethan into a tight hug, holding on like he was afraid to let go. Ethan held him back just as tightly, and something in his chest settled. Because this, working through the hard stuff, choosing each other even when it wasn't easy, this was what real looked like. Spring arrived slowly, reluctantly, the way it always did in Montana. The snow melted gradually, revealing the brown grass underneath that would soon turn green again. The days grew longer, warmer. The ranch came back to life, calving season, new foals, repairs to be made after winter's damage. Ethan's parents came to visit in April. It was his mother's idea, tentative and nervous in the way she'd presented it over the phone. "We want to see where you're living," she'd said. Meet Garrett." The visit was awkward at first. His parents clearly didn't know what to make of the ranch, of Ethan's new life, of Garrett. His father asked careful questions about the work, about finances, about long-term stability. His mother was quieter, watching everything with sharp eyes. But on the second day, something shifted. They were all in the barn. Garrett was showing Ethan's father one of the new foals, while Ethan helped his mother navigate the muddy ground in her completely inappropriate shoes. She stopped suddenly, watching Garrett and her husband talk, watching the easy way Garrett moved around the animals, the patient way he explained things. "He's good for you," she said quietly. "I can see it, the way you look at him, the way you hold yourself differently here." Ethan followed her gaze. "Yeah, he is." "And you're happy, really happy?" Ethan thought about the past 7 months, the fear and the joy, the hard work and the quiet moments, the way he'd become someone he actually recognized in the mirror. "More than I've ever been." His mother nodded slowly, then reached over and squeezed his hand. "That's all I wanted to know." They left 2 days later, and while things weren't perfect, his father was still processing, still clearly uncertain about Ethan's choices. It was better. A start. That night, Ethan and Garrett sat on the porch of their house, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink. Garrett's hand was warm in his, their shoulders touching, and Ethan felt something he'd been chasing his whole life without knowing it: peace. "Thank you," Ethan said quietly. Garrett glanced over. "For what?" "For seeing me, for making me believe I could have this, for not giving up when I was too scared to reach for it." Garrett's smile was soft. You did the hard part. I just loved you enough to wait while you figured it out." It was the first time either of them had used that word, love, and it hung in the air between them, huge and true and terrifying. Ethan turned to face Garrett fully, heart pounding. "Say it again," Ethan whispered. Garrett's smile widened. "I love you." "I love you too." The words felt new in his mouth, but right, so incredibly right. "I should have said it sooner, I should have." "You said it when you were ready, that's all that matters." Ethan leaned in, kissed him soft and slow, tasting the promise of all the tomorrows they'd have together. When they pulled apart, Garrett was grinning. "So," Garrett said, a teasing note in his voice, "think you can finally admit I was right." "About what?" "That day in the barn when you told me not to look at you that way. Turns out you're really glad I did." Ethan laughed, full and genuine. "Yeah, okay, you were right. I'm really glad you looked at me that way. And you're glad you stayed. Best decision I ever made." They sat together as the sun finished setting, as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, as the world turned quiet around them. And Ethan thought about the man he'd been when he first arrived, lost, running, afraid to want anything too much because wanting meant risk, meant vulnerability, meant the possibility of getting hurt. But that man was gone now, replaced by someone braver. Someone who'd learned that the scariest thing wasn't taking the risk, it was living a life where you never took any risks at all. 1 year later, almost to the day, Ethan found himself back in the barn doorway. But this time, he wasn't trying to run. He was watching Garrett work with one of the new horses, patient and focused, speaking in those low, soothing tones that had first caught Ethan's attention all those months ago. And when Garrett finished and turned, finding Ethan watching him, he smiled, that same smile that had unraveled Ethan's defenses from the very beginning. "Hey," Garrett said, walking over, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Didn't hear you come in." "I like watching you work," Ethan admitted. "You get this look on your face, this intensity." Garrett stopped in front of him, tilted his head in that familiar way. "Don't you dare look at me like that," he said, echoing Ethan's words from a year ago, but his tone was playful now, fond. "Like what?" Ethan played along, smiling. "Like you want to kiss me in the middle of the barn where anyone could see." "Maybe I do." Ethan reached out, pulled Garrett closer by his belt loops. "Maybe I don't care who sees anymore." That's a significant change from the guy who couldn't even admit he had feelings. People change, especially when they have a good reason to. Garrett's arms came around Ethan's waist and they stood like that for a moment, dusty and work-worn and perfectly content. "Best year of my life," Garrett said quietly. "Mine too," Ethan kissed him, quick and sweet. "Here's to many more." "Many more," Garrett agreed. And as they walked out of the barn together, hands linked, toward the house they'd made into a home, Ethan looked back once, at the doorway where everything had started, where he'd stood terrified and on the edge of running. He was glad he hadn't run, he was glad he'd stayed. He was glad for every moment, the scared ones, the brave ones, the messy ones, the beautiful ones. He was glad for the way Garrett had looked at him that day, and every day since. The end.